Hello and welcome. Thank you for all being here. I know it's close to the end of the first day of Dreamforce, and I'm very excited. We've managed to fill such a large room with such a bunch of happy faces. Today we are doing the 7 deadly sins of Salesforce automation. My name is Micah Joel. I'm a sales engineer. I've been with Salesforce about 2 years. And I am hoping you'll have a good time this afternoon. We decided on a fun title, and I think it's a fun subject, and we've got some absolutely wonderful speakers here who I think you're going to learn a lot from. First off, by a show of hands, who knows what the 7 deadly sins are? Who's heard of them before? There we go. Keep those hands up. Who probably, if pressed, could possibly name all 7 sins? All right, any hands left? Nobody could name all 7 sins. Well, you're going to find out about them today. Some of you, I know the 7 sins. We're going to go through them today. These are the 7 deadly sins, or 7 mortal sins that you may be familiar with. Some of you may have seen a film a number of years ago about them. Some of you may have learned about them in school of various types. But that said, let me start here. Life is complicated. Life is complex. There's a lot of things that can happen, and most of us don't set out to sin. We sort of find ourselves sinning by accident later on. And by the same measure, Salesforce has a lot of sophistication and a lot of paths you can take and a lot of power and a lot of great things you can do. But some customers kind of find themselves down a path that they didn't expect to go down. And sometimes they find that they've sinned. They've done something that really they could do better. They could have taken a different approach. And they end up in a situation where they could have really done a better job in the first place. And so what we have here today are speakers who have done a very good job in some areas. And they're going to talk about the places where you can go wrong. Salesforce is a great tool, and our strength can also be a weakness. There's so much you can do with it. There's so many things you can do. There's so much configuration. There's so much flexibility. These folks were able to harness that flexibility, were able to understand where the strengths and the weaknesses were, and were able to come up with solutions to the common things that people do when they set out to deploy Salesforce automation and to turn them into virtues. So you'll see that today. Before we start, of course, you may have seen our safe harbor statement before. This just to make sure you're aware that any functionality that you see today, actually pretty much everything you're going to see today is in production. But just in case we mention anything that's in the future, we want you always to make your buying decisions on what Salesforce currently has. The key takeaways from today's session are going to be the following. Always be looking for ways to improve the value of Salesforce. There's always a way you could be doing it. There's always something you could be doing to make sure that you're getting your money's worth out of this tool. We want you to. We want you to feel like you're getting your money's worth out of Salesforce. And there are lots of things that you may not yet be doing, some of which are very easy, and Marla's going to talk about this in a little bit, you can turn on and make available and start getting more value. Let the business guide you. Listen to your business users, but use a firm hand. Don't let them push you around. There are decisions that may need to be driven by how the product works, and may also need to be driven by what the business needs further down the line, and not just what the immediate business user needs. And Heather's going to be talking about that as well, using a firm hand with your users so that you don't end up down a rat hole. You don't end up sinning, even by accident. And lastly, the data can be just as important as the process. Let your data drive you. Know what you're trying to get. Know what you're trying to do, and start there and work backwards into how you're going to get there. Let the data you need to run your business be the thing that helps you understand what you're going to be doing with Salesforce. So with that said, let me introduce our speakers. I'll start with the first speaker first. This is Marla Landis. She works at Yelp, and she will be talking about our first bullet point, and she will be our first speaker. This is Heather Logan. She works at Saba. And this is David Gaines, who works at Toro. And so all 3 of these speakers have really done an amazing job. And at this stage, I'm going to hand things over to Marla to talk about what they've done right at Yelp.
Hi there. So quickly, just first things first, quick overview of Yelp if you're not aware of what it is. Basically, it's a website that connects people with great local businesses, from anything from restaurants, doctors, dentists, to whatever, the best bar in town. And what we do is we sell sponsored results to local businesses, and we have about 8 million business reviews and about 26 million visitors per month. And so if you haven't checked it out already, I highly recommend it, especially if you're new to San Francisco. It'll give you some good tips. Okay, so the first thing we have is sloth. So sloth is the failure to utilize one's talents and gifts out of laziness and indifference. Basically what it is it's almost a sin of omission, of not doing something, of being apathetic. And in an instance of life or your company, last thing you want is someone who just really doesn't care and doesn't contribute and is essentially a waste of space. And who wants someone like that in their company, right? So what happens often is, if you get someone in, let's say, Salesforce, and, it's a sales rep or whoever's using it, what you don't want them to do is feel so overwhelmed by what you've offered them that they decide that they're just not going to partake in it and just basically be lazy and indifferent towards it. So what happens sometimes is that when an administrator or a sales ops or whoever's kind of doing the background work of Salesforce, they sometimes get stuck in, great little fun, nice-to-have details of required fields. And next thing you know, the rep is clicking 100 million times, and it's just slowing down the process, and it frustrates them. So what you want to do is sometimes just step back and look at the larger picture and make sure that you're helping them help the better good or your company go down and do what you need them to do. So at Yelp, what we've done is to avoid sloth and to avoid this indifference, I did take a step back. I happened to be the administrator there. I took a step back from the small details, and I decided to implement the console. I customized the console to our needs by basically modifying the mini console and the mini page layouts. And then I also activated hover details and related hover lists. So a small anecdote, the way this actually came out to be was that I'm the administrator and I've been making these great little fun custom fields that I thought were really nifty, and then one day I go into the kitchen and I hear all of the AEs and all the reps who happen to be, my friends, just moaning and groaning about how just tedious it is to do all these clicks and how they can't see the accounts and the opportunities all at the same time. And so I remembered that I had somewhere in the help and training at some point run across this thing called the console. And I kind of just thought it was cool at the time and kind of stuck it in the back of my brain for, I guess, this scenario. So I went immediately back to my desk, went into help and training, and quickly found a two-sheeter of how to implement the console. So it's super easy. Didn't really have any background in it beforehand, but I'll go through and actually show you how easy it is. So the console, and after that I show you how easy it is to set up, I have a screenshot of what it actually is and how great it is, I think. So you just go to setup, and if you see on the left-hand side, there's the app setup and customizing. And then just like your other objects, like accounts and whatnot, there's a console button, and then you can go and it says console layout. And as soon as you get into that, it pretty much does it for you. You just follow the simple steps. And then just go back. If you want to actually get it up onto your tabs at the top, you just customize it by using a little arrow, and just like how anybody can, basically move the accounts around or whatnot and just essentially customize the tabs, you can go ahead and do that and add the console there. So hover details, this is one thing that you can do. Just note it's an org-wide thing, so it's not one of those things where one person can have hover details and one person can't. So I don't know why somebody wouldn't want to have things that would make your life easier, but if you want to make your life harder, that's your own choice. So again, setup, customize, and then down there's search and the user interface, and then that gives you the buttons that you can go ahead and select. So there's hover details at the top, at the user interface, and then also, I didn't circle it, but in the calendar you can see that there's also hover details over there. So this is the console, and also the hover details are in this as well. So I just happened to choose an opportunity one because I think that's where you get to see the most benefit, at least for us in terms of our organization. So the first thing that you see circled on the left-hand side is that there's the little drop-down where it says opportunities. In that drop-down, there are also your other objects. You can have your leads, you can have your accounts, you can have your contacts there as well. The second little drop-down is actually my layout. It says Marla's Playground. It's my list view. So you can't create list views here, but you can see all of them. So if I were in the opportunity object and I had this custom list view of certain things in certain stages, I can go ahead and see that. And then those are the results right there. There's also a search function on the right-hand side and recently viewed, so you can go ahead and use that. And then where I have the larger circle right underneath there, the search list, that can also be customized through your search layouts. So the main thing that we have right here is the opportunity. So if I'm a rep and I'm working this opportunity, I have the opportunity right there. And then to the right-hand side, you can see some of the related objects. So I have the account, and then I also have the contact. If I had partners, it would be there too. And then other opportunities that are also associated with this particular opportunity and account as a whole. That can all be customized. You can decide what you want there and what you don't want there. And then those are mini page layouts that are on the right-hand side. So you can also customize that as to, those are the mini console layouts. So you can customize what fields go there. And then here's an example of the hover details. So I have my arrow over, or my mouse over the account name, and pop up comes this mini layout, and that's all customizable, which I'll show you the next screen that you can do. And then the larger circle at the top above that is all of those related lists also have hover links. So if my mouse were over one of those, it would jump and show you a snapshot of that. So basically, like I was saying, it's just a great way to get a snapshot of pretty much everything that's involved in that opportunity. And so for our organization and for our sales team, it ends up being extremely useful and actually saves me a shortcut of having to do these formula fields that would maybe get a field onto the account page because it initially existed at the account level, but now they want to see it at the opportunity level, et cetera, et cetera. So I can get everything in one kind of page. So just quickly saying, going back to how easy it is to tweak, all of those mini page layouts and all that mini console layout, all of that can be fixed and tweaked and customized through the account object here in this instance, and then the layouts. And so on the right-hand side, you see that there is the mini layout and the console layout, and then the main screen that you're seeing right here is just the main page layout. So there's how to avoid sloth. So just look for ways to optimize for speed and efficiency, so make sure that people are invested and to prevent them from being indifferent and apathetic. And make sure that you use tools that are actually already available to you, like the console. And with that, I would say to leverage tools like help and training that is just really easy to help you go ahead and set all this stuff up. Okay, so on to our second sin. We have pride. So pride is the excessive love of oneself and one's work. And sometimes you hear some philosophers, they actually think pride is a virtue, but in most religions, it's actually seen as the worst sin. And it's basically being so in love with yourself that, again, kind of like sloth, you're not really looking to the better good, and you're not working towards the better of the company or whatever the circumstance is. So it's another way of looking at it to me is that you're kind of blindsided by what other good works are out there that could also help you do your job. So for one thing that happens with companies is that they don't want to let go of these on-premise systems, and they're just really afraid of these on-demand systems and of being in the cloud. It seems like a big step. They've already invested so much time and money that why would you leave it? Well, for us, we're actually at Yelp. I thought we had one more slide in here. But maybe not. Okay, so at Yelp, actually, we pretty much rely on the cloud. So we use Google Apps, we use Google Mail, Google Docs, Google Calendar, everything like that. We use Basecamp, we use Finality. We use as much of the cloud and on-demand systems as possible. And so one thing that I've done here is I've integrated much of these on-demand systems with our Salesforce environment. So in essence, I could make it so that the sales rep would never actually even have to leave Salesforce. So if you see at the top, and I've shown two different ways that we've integrated some of the basic on-demand systems that we have. One is through the custom tabs at the top, and the other is through the quick links. The quick links will get you outside of Salesforce. But the custom tabs, what you do is there's different settings that you can do, but it actually ends up appearing within the window of Salesforce, and you can still see the Salesforce tabs. In some instances, you can also see the Salesforce sidebar, depending on what your settings are. I've also circled the calendar. I'll get back to that a little bit later, but we do sync up with our Google calendars and then also use the multi-user calendar function so that we can look at everyone's calendars and also set up appointments that way. Okay, so just to show you quickly how easy it is to actually get these on-demand systems into Salesforce so that people aren't constantly clicking out and using different windows and opening different tabs. You just go, again, set up, customize, and then there are the two options. There's going to home and setting up your custom links, or there's the create, and you can create a new tab. And the creating tab is really easy. Usually it just ends up cutting and pasting, or copying and pasting a link to your on-demand system. Okay, so then the other thing we do is some of our on-demand systems we actually just go and get straight from the App Exchange. So one of those things I have to say is that there are a lot of free products out there, so if you already think that, I'm going to start plugging some other products, I wouldn't be scared of that. There are tons of really great products on there that you can get and you can install and that don't really take much effort or much tech background. So some of the instances here that I've shown is I've circled the main ones that our salespeople really use. So the first one is to Google Calendar. The second one is the Gmail to Salesforce, so that our Gmail and our Salesforce sync up. And then we also use Finality, which is our phone, the way we track our phone calls, and so we can go ahead and report on all of those within Salesforce. And so if you just go ahead and on the setup button, you check out the deploy, and you can see or view installed packages and see updates and kind of make sure that things are going well over there if you end up running into something. So here's just an example at the very end here. So there's an example of Google Docs within one of the tabs. So if you notice at the bottom, there is Google Docs. And then up above, I still am in the Salesforce environment with all the Salesforce tabs. And then at the bottom here, there's just an example of checking out everyone else's calendar through the multi-view calendar and how I can book an appointment. And that's both ways. So it goes, not only does it, if you create an appointment into your Salesforce calendar, it also goes into the Google Calendar. So it looks back and forth, cross-references. So basically, the way we avoid pride, we use things like on-demand services, like Gmail or Google Mail, Google Calendar, Google Docs, Google Sites, Google Video, Analytics, Ad Manager, Finality, Basecamp. You name it, if we can do it, we will. So basically, the way you can avoid pride is to not throw good money onto on-premise deployments and to look for enterprise-class on-demand equivalents to a lot of the on-premise systems. Like I said, don't be afraid. We've done it. We've been on it for about 3 years, and it works out well. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So a round of applause for Marla from Yelp. Next, I'd like to introduce Heather from Saba Corporation. And here you are.
Hi, everybody. Are we having fun? Okay, let me try this one more time. Are we having fun? Much better. Okay. Saba is an enterprise HR software, learning management. Most of our customers are Fortune 500 customers. We have 600 employees. Makes for a very interesting sales cycle and a very interesting relationship with our customers. I'm going to let you guys read that. I don't need to read that to you. Let's talk about wrath. So, dirty data can be as bad as no data at all, and is usually worse because you're making decisions based on what you think is right but has no basis. There's a lot of ways to get around this, but the best way is to use validation rules, use approval processes, and make sure that your data is as clean as you can get it. You've got record types. Those are great, especially when people only need to see certain pieces of information. There are lots of things that users want. Just because they want it, just because you can do it, doesn't mean you should. Is that an easy message to deliver to executives? No. But the message that you have to deliver after you say yes and there's a problem is, I'm really sorry, but that's a whole lot worse. So if you can get out in front of it and look a little bit further about what they're going to do with the data, you end up in a much better place and you have a lot more respect from your executives. So if you look up at the screen, this is the way an admin sees my account layout screen. There are a couple of fields on here that are really important for us, and while they're not marked on the page as required, they are required for us to create an account. One is a SIC code and the other is the DUNS number. And so what we've done is, this page layout is 5 people in our organization, and they're responsible for entering the account information. When a sales rep, the owner in this case, looks at the same account layout, they don't have access to modify the DUNS number and they don't have access to modify the SIC code. That does a couple of things for us. One, it makes sure that when we sync our data, we always have the correct legal account name. It also means that when we go and look at who our customers are, what industry do they belong to, we do all of that by SIC code. And so we're sure when somebody says, how many financial customers do you have? And we give them a number, that if they come back and say, how did you get that number? Well, here's the list of companies, here's the SIC code that we get from either Hoover's or from Dun & Bradstreet. Those are the customers in that industry. The other thing that we do is validation rules. And so the top validation rule is talking about account creation. This is how I've prevented an AE from creating an account. Very simple. It sits on the SIC number, and if it's a new record and the SIC is blank, it won't let you save the record. Ergo, clean data. The second one is a little bit more clever, a little bit more interesting in that Salesforce natively will not let you make the account name read-only for any profile. If they can edit the record, they can edit the account name. And so what we did was put a validation rule in place to make sure that we didn't have an AE changing Bank of America, NA Inc. to be B of A because that's the way they think of it. So what the validation rule says is if there's a DUNS number entered on the account, we know that that account name is the correct legal name. And so unless you are part of my regional admin group or the system admin, you can't change the account name. It gives you a very logical error message and tells you where to go. The next thing that we've done to make sure that our data stays clean is that Finance locks opportunities once they've been closed to make sure that the numbers really are mapped. So when an opportunity has been Finance locked, this is all the account anyone will see on the account. They don't have an edit button, nothing can change. All they see is that it's shared, the ability to see who else can share it. Finance, however, still can edit those deals. So if there is a change or if there's something that happens on the deal later, they always have the ability to make any changes that are needed. Make sure that when we do our finance roll-ups and look at what deals have closed, we know that those numbers are absolutely good. Sometimes asking just isn't enough, and so we're back to validation rules to make sure that we're enforcing clean data. Close date has to be in the future. Here's, salespeople get busy. They forget to change a close date. You're trying to close, they lose a deal and it's close to the end of the quarter, so we're going to, move the date to last quarter, or we're going to move it to, I don't want to have to explain this one right now. So the close date has to be in the future. Otherwise, we end up with deals that get updated, but the close date never does, and they fall off our forecast reports. A little bit different, required fields when we close cases. Very simple, but it makes the data when we go to do reporting much, much better. Envy. Everybody wants everything. Everybody sees the pretty graphs that Salesforce shows, and they are. They're beautiful. But they don't, sometimes the pretty things don't give you the numbers that you really need to make your business run. So for us, this is a copy of our sales dashboard that we use for our quarterly reviews and that the sales teams use on a regular basis. You can see that Elmer Fudd is not really having such a great, Elmer Fudd's having a great quarter. Yosemite Sam, not so much. Sorry, I grew up with Looney Tunes. But it also shows you what my pipeline is for best case, for forecast, what my product mix looks like, and what I'm doing for the next couple of quarters, as well as what the activities are that I'm being tracked against for my metrics for this quarter. So each of my regions has this type of a dashboard, and just like everything else, the users can drill in and see exactly where they are, but they don't see everybody else in terms of detail. But everybody sees these roll-ups, so it builds some really good, nice healthy competition, shall we say. And with that, I'll hand it over to David, and he'll cover the last 3 sins.
Thank you, Heather. A round of applause for Heather, please.
Thank you.
Now, David.
Micah, thank you. Thank you very much. If Yelp represents the new economy, which it certainly does, Toro would be the prototypical old economy. We actually manufacture products you can kick and throw, lawnmowers. And I'm going to take just a minute and talk a little bit about Toro as a company and the way we're configured, because it has a lot to do with my sins. And anybody who could list all 7 know that I've still got greed, gluttony, and lust, which are my 3 personal favorites. But Toro was founded in 1914, so it's 95 years old. It's extremely successful. We've got upwards of 80% market share in some of our product categories, and they've gotten that way without any technology in their sales and marketing areas. So they've grown pretty big in a 5-division organization, which is segmented from marketing and branding all the way down through engineering. There is no real alignment. They really operate like subsidiaries, and they're very competitive with each other. So I was hired 3 years ago specifically to come in and try and make CRM work, as they were calling it at the time. They had 5 failed attempts over 12 years. The smallest price tag that they had on it was $10 million. So you can see where probably some of the sins we've already been talking about hit them as they were trying to make it work. So when we came in, it really was about changing the culture of the way we work with technology to drive revenue. So that was kind of my mantra. I actually interviewed there and said, I don't really care what you do. Here's what you need to be able to do to accomplish implementing a technology platform in a sales organization where people have been there for 30 years and they sell everything they want to sell. We have great command of our market. Well, why did they want a sales tool to begin with? Well, greed. They wanted the other market share. They wanted every single dime that they could possibly get out of the market. In the golf industry, we're really a blue chip, no less than 50% market share. In consumer, we're in the 20 to 30% market share. It's a good, solid business. But when we got into the discussions, what we found was that the organizations didn't share, they didn't cooperate, they were very competitive with each other. And they weren't only just the good kind of greed, which is the desire to get to close more business. They also wanted to own the process. They wanted to own each of their customers independently. They didn't want to have to share the resources. And I by the way, represent IT and not coming out of the typical sales operations organization. So I was kind of coming in as an outsider twice, actually. Once, that they didn't really want to work with IT, and second, that we were really putting in a tool that they were asking for but weren't exactly clear about what exactly that was. What is shared contacts, which is really the vocabulary that was basically used. Why do I want to share? Why do I want to share anything? Well, I want to hold everything is the way they worked. So the first thing we needed to overcome was, first of all, how is it that we, number one, select a tool, because we didn't have a tool on the plate at that point. We are an SAP shop, so you can tell what the IS organization probably wanted me to choose. But that isn't the path we ended up choosing. And so what we had to do was make everyone feel special. So we needed to make sure when we started with our first division, number one, I had 5 working groups within that division. I have 32 total independent working groups across 5 divisions globally. So each one of these organizations really wanted to be treated like they were the only ones. They didn't want to be, they didn't want to have to share the IT resources. They didn't want to have to share seats. They didn't want to have the meetings. It was all about them, right? And this is a good, solid sales organization. It's what you want them to do, to sell, not to pay attention to my team. So what we began to do is clarify a value proposition that was very specific. And I'll cover this again, actually, because greed and gluttony kind of work hand in hand, so to speak. And we just began to work with them about, give me the one thing that you need of value, and how is it that we continue to drive that value. And just like earlier, I really didn't care about the process that much. One of the values after we decided that Salesforce was the right tool, and one of the reasons we decided Salesforce was the right tool, is because I could focus on the data. I could implement the data, I could make the data common, and I could take the burden of that data away from the business and allow them to rethink their business. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So an organization that came in and said, we know exactly what we're doing, we have a very rigid process, this is the way we work, this is how we've been successful in the past. We actually sat for our first 6 hours of meetings and we rethought their entire process, because by the time they walked in and saw the tool for the first time, we had already uploaded all of the data. 16,000 golf courses, actually 15,886 golf courses, 100,000 municipalities, 110,000 of these, and several million consumers. So we were able to just boil the ocean for them and get it in there. And then what we did is I use a very demonstration-based model, which means we have an analyst that runs out into the business. He does a bunch of triage like a strategy consultant, sort of. We capture the data, we upload the data, and then the first meeting, we actually have the full team in a room and we would show the entire product to them, and then we'd start thrashing through certain use cases. By the time we got to our 4th meeting, we were essentially getting sign-off and saying, okay, we go live on meeting 5. So we would have this model where we could just basically distribute and deploy and distribute and deploy and over again. And what that allowed each division to think is that we didn't have any other customers. You know, my sales rep, account executive this afternoon actually told me he had another customer today. I thought I was offended by that. But that's what we really wanted to do. So they could be greedy. Now what we did is, I think what some of the others are doing as well, is the reason we can do that is a real simple concept called record types. Salesforce is just very simple in that it allows us to segment record types so that each of our divisions can feel mutually exclusive, and yet I can deal with data management offline. Because I happen to, lucky or unlucky, depending on how you call it, I happen to own enterprise data management for Toro as well. And I have the nice tools that help me scrub and clean data, so I don't have to wrestle through that too much. So once we got through greed, becomes the hardest one to fight. I think it's the hardest I've done a bunch of implementations over my career. And gluttony is probably the most difficult. And the way it usually manifests itself, I find, is that it comes in words like, what I'd like to see, or it moves away from the verbs and moves towards nouns. I refer to Salesforce or operational tools as being verbs. They're things that we want to do. We want to drive action, constantly driving action. And what sales organizations, marketing organizations, and really I think just human nature, want it to be a reporting tool. They want me to take my 7 terabytes of SAP data and push it in there so that they can sift through it in that. So gluttony for us was actually the one that was the easiest to expect coming, because it's what it is. I would do the same thing if you walked in, as a matter of fact, implementing any tool inside IS, and I'm annoying about all the things that I want it to do. But my mantra for the last 3 years has really been focus on adoption. Adoption is king. And the discussions I usually have is, I've never seen a sales organization fire their top sales guy because he doesn't use his tool. Now, I just saw Dan Deldegan give his presentation. He might. So the idea is you got to get the big winner first. You got to be able to put your arms around all those grand needs and be able to boil them down to the essence of what their intent is. And if you can translate the I'd like to see and I'd like to have into what the business intent and business value is, and continue to challenge, and this really has to be an iterative and really a partner type process, is focus on getting it used. And my goal was 75% of users have to log in every week before I would continue my investment in their area. So I came in as kind of selling my product, but after I got them hooked and got the hook set, I kind of switched roles on them a little bit, and I started to take more of a lead role and say, you know what, you got to prove to me that this is going to be a tool that's valuable. I will do anything I can to make this tool a valuable tool. And I focused on adoption. When adoption started to hit, we now move through a monthly release schedule. So we actually then cater back to the greed side of it, and we probably have 6 new pieces of functionality every month that gets deployed, depending on how you're using it. The most important thing when you're really fighting gluttony is trying to fight what the business value drivers are in the implementation. And I'll give you an example. We have one of our divisions, which is quite successful in the golf industry. Really what they're interested in is deals over a certain threshold. They've got 50 to 80% market share. They're really going after targeting competitive deals. Our 2 largest competitors, John Deere and Jacobson, in that particular space, are very tenacious. They're bigger than we are. They've got much deeper resources, and yet the director of sales in this organization happened to mention in a CEO level meeting that we've increased 12 percentage points in one of our product categories, and they attribute it to the way we focused Salesforce. We allowed them to actually focus on particular deals. That was one thing. We didn't even deploy dashboards for them when we went live. It was one thing. How do I get competitive business? And that's all we focused on. We went to another division, and they have a very different sales model, which is very distribution driven. They're really interested in call reporting, trip reporting, and they do time analysis to see how much time is in a car, an airplane, versus in front of the customer. 2 completely different businesses, but we got adoption very quickly in both of those areas by focusing on just that one thing. In that case, just like greed, we used our record types. Now, here's the way we had to do this. I actually had to do this for our CEO. This is what I call the bingo board. And I put it up because it's fairly confusing and a bit overwhelming. But the top columns actually represent all of my working areas. Like I said, there are 32 individual working teams that are users or potential consumers of Salesforce. Now, the rows represent core functionality, advanced functionality, integrated functionality, and custom functionality. And what we wanted to do is exactly what we did, is we tried to go up and fill in the top category with green. Now, everything can't possibly be green because you can't get, all business areas aren't interested in the same things. But this is what we used to track it, to explain to the business what was going on, why we were focusing on the things that we were focusing on, because we wanted to make sure we were going to get value out of the tool. Even though it's an extremely cost-effective tool, a tool that isn't costing you a lot of money can still be a waste of money. It's got to be used, seats got to be filled, and you have to be using it day to day. And I can say after our first 16 months that we have all 208 salespeople currently on, and we're running our business off of it, which is good. We start working through call centers this month, actually. So Lust, this is actually my favorite. And it's, you know what, there's only one word I can say for Lust, because think about it. I've got an organization that's never had a tool in place. What do you think the first thing they wanted? Well, they wanted mobile. They wanted it all on their phone. So that was one of both the gluttony, but also they're reading the same trade magazines I am. They're reading their sales magazines that says, hey, you can raise your children and wash your car on your phone. You know, you got to have this. And I try to use it on my phone, and it works. I am absolutely not against mobile. But finding the cool thing is not necessarily what's going to drive the revenue and make the business successful. Now, am I starting to think, how do I get GPS linked to our map to get to our data so that when someone walks on a golf course, we get all the data presented? Yeah, but I don't tell them that. I want to make sure that I can deliver it, that, again, it's very well adopted, and I want to make sure that everything works seamlessly. And that's an important part to being able to fight lust. Being able to fight lust is being able to demonstrate why chasing your emotions isn't necessarily going to get you to the outcomes you're looking for. And when it comes down to it, everything we're doing is about affecting our outcomes. And everything we do in the tool is about how do we affect our outcomes in order to drive revenue. So I think the last slide I've got here is, you know, I want this on my phone too, particularly on the Android, if anybody's listening who wants to develop an application for me. But I think that we will start moving down that mobile area, but it's no longer based on emotion. It's now based off a business need. And there are more things that are coming. We've seen it with social media. If everyone in here isn't being pummeled by their organizations around how do you integrate with social media, which we proved is very viable within Salesforce using our tools as well. But again, that's also part of the emotion. Make sure that there's a business case and business value that can be delivered through that particular piece of functionality, and just don't bite and just don't do it. And I tend to be very argumentative, so it's a fairly fun activity for me to go through. And I believe Micah is now going to remind us of what we just learned. Thank you.
A round of applause for David. So to reiterate, always be looking for ways to improve. Marla talked a little bit about increasing the speed of the organization and taking a tool that's typically used in a service organization, the console, and applying it to sales. Heather talked a little bit about letting your business guide you, but being very firm, and particularly being firm about the data that you require to run that business, making sure that financial data syncs up with Salesforce data, and using the tools that are in Salesforce to help you do that. And then David talked about the data being really the center of the world, starting from what the data you need, and then guiding the users and guiding the adoption around the acquisition of that data, so that you're not just giving users everything that they want and not having the business benefit from it. So with that said, I'd like to open it up to questions. I hope you have some questions for our speakers today. If you do, please raise your hand or walk up to a microphone, and feel free to ask any of these speakers something about what they've done. And if you don't, then I will ask them questions, and you'll be stuck listening to me. So I'd love to hear some questions from the audience. Is there anyone here who has anything they'd like to ask our speakers? All right. Well, then I will start with a question for you guys. Oh, I'm sorry? Yes, the question is, will they have access to this presentation? And the answer is yes. We will be posting all of this, I believe, on the Salesforce.com homepage. There will be a link through to Dreamforce information. We have a question in the back, sir.
This is a question for Heather. You described battling wrath with required fields. How do you prevent people from entering just any kind of data which looks correct, but in fact isn't? Like your SIC codes, they just enter any code, and you'd never discover it's actually the wrong code.
Okay, so if I understood the question correctly, it was how do we prevent someone entering the wrong SIT code or the wrong DUNS number?
Yes.
So we've only got 5 people in the organization who can enter those fields. Those fields are locked down to regional administrators. So since you can see who created the account, it's very easy to police 5 people. It's much harder to police 100 salespeople. So those 5 people have spent a lot of time with me, and they're the ones who I go back to and make them clean up dirty data. So it's in their best interest to do the searches first, to make sure that the account doesn't already exist, to make sure that they are getting that data in right, because when we go and do another sync, and I have all of these records that don't match DUNS numbers, those all go back to the regional administrators for them to figure out what's wrong.
So you don't recommend using this method with like sales reps?
You can use the same method for the sales team. You have to have a process in place for how do you clean it up. For us, our sales executives didn't want their very highly paid salespeople spending a lot of time looking stuff up. So we have regional admins that do that for them. So it's more of a sales operations type job. So that's the way we've treated it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another question?
Yep, for the gentleman on the end, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, for the gentleman on the end. You talked a little bit about before deeper investment, getting adoption rates to meet a goal. Can you expand on that a little bit, how you did that?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Sorry, can you just expand on that a little bit, how you did that, making sure that the adoption rate was at a certain level?
It was really fairly simple. What we did is we just used the adoption dashboards. I think they're even out of the box with Salesforce. They give you when logins. We built a few custom reports that we use, and I would do it by division, and I would look for an aggregate. And I don't look for 100% because I don't expect executives to be logging in. And then I would actually make phone calls into the organization weekly, saying, is there anything we can do? And what we found is they would actually give us feedback about a button that needs to be changed or something needs to be more intuitive. And we'd find we'd increase our adoption with every phone call we made.
So you target the divisions where the adoption was low?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so when adoption isn't what we think it needs to be, we just make phone calls and we act like sales reps and we go out there and ask them what we can do better. We own it. We would own that problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question.
So I have a series of questions for you. First, you're 2 or 3 years into your deployments. Did you look at partners, implementation partners, to help you with your implementations? And secondary to that, did you use business process reviews as part of your implementation? So now, fast forward 2 or 3 years, how do you define and roll out changes that you make to your organizations with the tools?
That could work for all three of us.
Who would like to start with that question?
I'll start, I guess. We certainly did business process reviews. We didn't go into huge detail until we got the tool in. We actually used the tool to facilitate process transformation. We kind of backdoored it. One of the things I didn't mention is that we did not have any executive sponsorship. This was very organic. This was something the CEO wanted to see but wasn't willing to sign up for. So what we've done is we've essentially, at the end of our 16-month journey on our initial release, have a complete set of system documentations, but it wasn't necessarily built in a linear way. We've also helped the organization document the processes in hindsight. So we did things after the fact in some cases, simply because it was pragmatic, and it was simply it was much easier after they'd been thinking through their process in order to get that documented. The way we deploy change is we use another tool that's not Salesforce as a portal tool, and we actually have a crm.toro.com, and we have a release calendar, and then we write a 2-pager. Every time we have a release, we call it just a quick start guide. And the reason it's easier for us to do is because we focused on adoption. We don't have to teach anyone anything else. And then we have a monthly meeting where we can deploy it all.
Is there anything either of you would like to add?
I think we've been on Salesforce 2.5 years, and we've got sales support, and we're bringing up engineering. And so we've done something a little bit different for each of the businesses, and so we've let their business processes drive how we're going to work with them. For sales, it was very linear. For marketing, it was very nonlinear. For support, it was totally different, and engineering is a whole different ball of wax entirely. So you really have to let your business drive how they can consume what you're giving them. As far as partners, that really depends on how complex you want to get and what your staff looks like internally. We've done some stuff that has been contracted out. A lot of the stuff we do in-house, but we can do that because we have the staff who have the development skills, who have the skills to do it. Again, you have to kind of weigh, there's always 3 parts to any project: time, people, and money. So which lever do you want to pull?
I don't really have all that much to add. I mean, we basically started, Salesforce is pretty much for our sales team. We just recently started using it for our IT and their user ops, our client services. But I mean, I was the 3rd license holder, and now I've just kind of gone with it. And we don't really have many partners, or we don't even let our engineers really, we don't have much of our engineering resources go to Salesforce. So I have to say that we really use, like pretty much as I mentioned in Sloth, what we're given, and it's basically me, and it's a lot of help and training and figuring stuff out, and so we just work with what comes out of the package, and it works for us so far. So.
And I should throw out that we use an offshore partner, so we actually hail requirements overseas and then bring them back in the morning.
Well, thank you, everybody. That's all we have time for today, but another round of applause for our speakers. And we'll see you all tonight.